With a whole world out there to explore, you may find yourself asking, where do I go next? How do I choose my destinations? And that's actually one of the questions I get the most as a full-time traveler. So in today's video, I'm going to tell you what I do and the resources that I utilize in picking my destinations. Hi, I'm Nadia. I am a full-time traveler, a digital nomad, a slow traveling, solo traveling woman who is globetrotting. And I talk specifically to Gen X and Xennial women about that lifestyle and what it could look like for them, and share some tips and stories from my explorations on the road. So if that's of interest to you, you are in the right place. And if you find this information that I cover helpful, certainly like and subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you can hear about what my next video, or hear about every time I do a video or share some updates with you. So now for today, we're talking about how I pick my destinations. And I have a disclaimer, just as a word of caution, I do not plan in advance. That is not for everyone, but that's just kind of how I do it. So it is not uncommon for me to not buy a plane ticket until less than a week before I leave. Same thing with a train or a bus ticket. Those may even be a day or two before I'm scheduled to leave. So again, that's not for everyone, but what I'm going to tell you about today is what resources I utilize in selecting my destination. So wanted to put that disclaimer out there and just let you know that that's the approach that I take. So to start, there are three things that I utilize at perhaps a macro level. A map, skyscanner.com, and emotion. So let me explain. What I like about a map, and this is one that I think I've purchased on Amazon, it's a Lonely Planet map that I stick up on the wall whenever I get to a new destination. But it gives me a world view. And I will find myself simply standing in front of the map. And I love looking at all of the places that I've been or that I should consider going to or what I've heard about. And what I like about the map is it gives me a sense for how close things are. Sometimes it highlights a place that I had never ever considered. But standing in front of the map is one of my best places, one of the best things I do for travel inspiration. So I love the world view. I love being able to see everything at a glance. And this has become kind of a security blanket. It's one of the first things that I put up in a new accommodation in whenever I arrive. So the map has been key. And I love that this one is foldable and packable. I find that my eyes will sometimes gravitate to a certain place. I'll make a note of it, and I just kind of come back to it. And I find that I keep coming back to certain places, so I just kind of take notes. So that's the first thing I do is I look at a map. So my second resource is a website called skyscanner.com, and Skyscanner is very similar to Google Flights. It is an aggregator website for hotel and flights and travel related information. And I think in some ways it's a little bit more powerful than Google Flights. Skyscanners.com will sometimes pick up on smaller flights and travel opportunities from OTAs, which are online travel agencies, that Google, like a behemoth like Google, may not pick up. So skyscanner.com, I use Google Flights too, but skyscanner.com is one of the other ones that I utilize. And why I like this one is that it has a search feature called Everywhere. So what I will do is insert my origin airport and then leave it open to see what Skyscanner pulls up for me in terms of, opportunities for discounted flights, or perhaps it will flag a novel location that I had never even considered. So Skyscanner's Everywhere feature is a great tool, and it seems to pull together quite a diverse mix of destinations, often at discounted rates. I then take that information and will do a more I guess go to the website of the airline to see if I can mirror that same routing. But skyscanner.com is a great resource, especially if you utilize the Everywhere feature. So that will sometimes provide me some inspiration, just as my map does. Now, my third tool is emotion. And I probably should say emotion and the universe, but it's really the unexplainable. It gives me a way to capture the unexplainable. And what I mean when I say the emotion or the universe or the unexplainable is sometimes I feel like the universe is conspiring in favor of me going to a particular place. And it may be that I dream about Turkey, or I keep meeting people from Ireland, or for whatever reason, I keep encountering information about, I don't know, Kenya. And I just I pick up on those little nuances, those little gentle nudges, and then I just flag it. So those are the three things that I go to look for inspiration for a destination. I do think that as a slow traveler and as a full-time traveler, the benefit of having the flexibility to choose wherever I go and not feel as restricted is certainly a factor in how I choose my destinations. But you know, I think that any of these could be applicable even if you're not a full-time traveler and if you're not a slow traveler. But when I look at places, I never think that I won't get back to it, or that I just look beyond the perhaps the norm in terms of thinking of different places to go. So my three macro level resources: my map, Skyscanner, and emotion. So there you have it. Now, once I have chosen a destination utilizing those three, and again, it doesn't take me very long to do any of this. I just, over a couple of days, might just start thinking about it and may pull up one of those three resources. Once I've picked a couple of places, I go a little bit deeper. And what I look at are other considerations that could be what leads to a deal breaker for me going to a particular place. So in that category, I'm looking at things like safety. I'm looking at geopolitics. I'm looking at visa opportunities, and I also will look at the perspectives of other people who meet my demographic who've been there. So those are some of the other layers that I will tap into when I'm doing some research. Now, I'll explain what I mean. When it comes to safety, certainly COVID was a consideration. Now that restrictions are getting lifted, but the pandemic's not completely over, that is something I was certainly monitoring. But with safety, I also look broad, and I'm looking at is whether or not there is a risk factor or consideration related to my personal safety. Is it safe for Americans? Is it safe for women? What are the perspectives of Black women when it comes to safety? All of those things. Some countries are just not as friendly with a solo traveling woman, catcalling, or people just not appreciate or respecting your space. So those are some of the things that I take into account as it relates to safety. And then of course your traditional things related to just violence or physical safety, and perhaps emotional safety is connected to that in the same way. So safety is a big one. When I look at geopolitics, certainly in light of some of the things that we're dealing with right now, I will typically start with the State Department. So the US State Department has country-specific pages where you can read about the history, the relations that the US has. It gives a pretty broad picture of what the climate might be like. And that has been really helpful. The third one is visa. Now, fortunately, with American passports, you have a lot of flexibility. Sometimes you can get a visa on demand, meaning that you can pick it up at the airport, or a visa on arrival. Sorry, that's the term, visa on arrival, where you can get it at the airport. Sometimes you don't need to have a visa, and sometimes you have a window of time. So, as an example, Turkey had a 90-day visa. So I had 90 days that I could spend within a 6-month period. If people are traveling in Europe, if you're going to a series of EU countries, there are Schengen rules that you need to be mindful of that, again, have a 90-day limitation on which on EU, travel to most EU countries. Then there are other countries, I think England, but don't quote me on that. I think we can stay 6 months without a visa. So you may find that other places are more accessible to you, or depending on how you're traveling, may be more accessible, or may have a window of time where you really need to be mindful. An example of that would be when I was in the United Arab Emirates, when I was traveling between Abu Dhabi and Dubai. That country allowed me to stay for 30 days, and then we had a roughly 10-day grace period before you got into trouble. So you want to definitely take into account visa rules and how any restrictions on time or your movement will impact just how you plan. And then the fourth one is perspectives of people who look like me. So I'm looking at blogs, I may read articles, State Department may have some data that's relevant to that, but I'm looking at, well, what are Black women saying? What are solo travelers saying? What are people in my age demographic saying? I will definitely look at that to see if that gives me additional insight about what the real situation is from the lens of a person who walks in shoes that are similar to mine. Now, that being said, when I take into account safety and geopolitics and the visa situation and perspectives, I definitely take things with a grain of salt. And what I mean by that is I look at it on a continuum. If I find that things are heavily in the negative, that might be the way I determine that something's a deal breaker. But I also balance my experience at home, recognizing that, sometimes, let's be real, the US can be a little bit more dangerous than other places. I look at things on a continuum and on that spectrum to see if, maybe I need to just apply some additional street smarts, or this situation that this blogger wrote about may be very, very hyper specific to their scenario. So I take it with a grain of salt, but definitely look at what is relevant for me, what my comfort level is, and use this collection of information to make an informed decision. So that may mean that I choose places that may not be a hotspot. I actually have absolutely no problem going to places that I've gone to in the past. I never think that something's completely off the table. I just may reserve it for another time. That has been my experience thus far with the types of places that I've chosen to go to. So there you have it, my 2 layers. The first one being my macro level, the map, the use of Skyscanner and what that's telling me, and what emotions are telling me, hey, you should look at these are the places you should consider going on your next trip. And then once I've made a decision of a couple of places, I take into account safety, I take into account geopolitics, I take into account the visa and how that might impact my movement, and I certainly look at the perspectives of other people. Now, it may seem like I'm spending so much time doing all this research, and quite frankly, it really isn't that much time. It may be over a couple of days, and I'm not sitting at the computer for hours on end doing that research. But I Google it, and I might watch some YouTube videos, and one of the things I enjoy about travel is the exploration and the experiences that I have. I try not to over-prescribe my travel experiences. So I may get a little bit of a framework from all of these resources and get a sense, and then make my decision. And the experience is really what I make it. So those are some of the things that I do. So for you, it may be something different, but I wanted to offer this information as some insight from the perspective of someone who's doing this day in and day out and has lots of flexibility to go where I want to go and perhaps stay a little bit longer than a vacation. But it's been fun, and it's really driven me to places that I perhaps would not have considered. And I think I've said in the past that when I went to Turkey, I thought I was just going to stay there for a couple of weeks and ended up staying 3 months, which was the duration of my visa. So you never know what inspiration will come your way when it comes to choosing a destination. But once you've had a chance to think it through, then look at the macro layer, or the second layer, to kind of vet the places that seem to be capturing your interest. Before I close, I do want to mention that I do take into account other livability factors. So common livability factors would include things like cost, weather, tourist season, maybe festivals, language barriers. Those are things, infrastructure, those are things that people will sometimes look at. Often if they have a limited period of time and they're trying to figure out, well, which place is going to maximize, where can I have the optimal experience? But when it comes to looking at those livability factors, for me, my approach is that those aren't typically deal breakers for me. And what I mean by that is all of these places have people living in them. So there is a way to live. You can look at cities like a New York or a Dubai, which are notoriously expensive. However, people go to them all the time, and maybe you just plan differently. So I don't think people should rule places out because the rumor is, or the word on the street is, that it's super expensive, or that infrastructure might not be the ideal. I think you try to be flexible. That's the approach that I take, is I try to be flexible, and I go from there. But I try to keep my mind open and go with the flow. So flexibility has been key for me when it comes to my travel, and a willingness to maybe plan a bit differently. Maybe trains don't come as frequently as you want. They may come once an hour, or as opposed to the every 10 minutes that you're accustomed to. It just may look a little bit different. So I wanted to throw that in there as it related to livability and some of the conveniences that we may be accustomed to, but don't let that get in your way. So do tell, what about you? What are some of the things that you take into account when you're choosing a destination? Is it comments from your friends and family? Is it because it showed up in a blog or an article? Did you get an inspiration from a movie? Tell me about it in the comments. And of course, before I close, if you liked this video, like it, and tell your friends, and subscribe to this channel, and don't forget to activate your notifications. My next video, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about travel readiness and some of the things that I do to prepare for an arrival in a new city, and pass along some of the things that I've learned, some of them the hard way, but that's what I'll cover on my next video. So thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing from you in the comments, and I appreciate you watching my channel. See you soon.